Hi, welcome to Unspoken History. My name is Keisha, and thank you for joining me today. I'm going to continue reading in the American Negro Slave Revolts book. I ended at the end of chapter 3 the last time, and I'm going to finish that one and then read chapter 4, Some Participants of Rebellion. That's the next chapter. Okay, so it says, at the end of the last one, I read, as a rule, these people were deprived of important civil rights, such as that of voting and of testifying in court against white persons. Social rights, such as regulations concerning miscegenation, regulating their presence on the streets after dark, and restricting their educational opportunities. Okay, now we're caught up. And their freedom of movement from state to state or county to county. Economic rights by restricting their trade or professions which they might pursue. Moreover, in order to cut down the growth of this type of population, it became, as the years passed, a policy of the states to make the act of manumission increasingly difficult. That is, buying your own freedom, increasingly difficult. And indeed, just prior to the Civil War, some of the states passed laws for the purpose of enslaving Negroes already free. So you see how some of these other black folks who had never been in um, birthright slavery could get caught up because take off all their clothes. Just saying. We all brown, different shades of brown and black. Some of us, but that's rare. You will rarely find a person whose skin is actually black. I think I know 3, and that's it. And they're the most beautiful people I ever met. Okay. It says, to summarize, then, one may say that the master of southern states, this is later on in the years, and that this is the late 1850s, because before that, we know, well, I know, look at my videos, um, there were a lot of black plantation owners, a lot of black free people in America before the 1800s. To summarize, then, one may say that the masters of the southern states were not content to depend merely upon social inertia or the power that their ownership of the means of production gave them in order to maintain their dominant position. On the contrary, they called into play every trick, rule, regulation, and device that the human mind could invent to aid them. The attempted psychological, intellectual, and physical debasement of an entire people, I don't know what this word, inculcating, the inculcating and glorifying of the most outrageous racial animosities, but stressed by theological, historical, and anthropological theories. So this is not education. It's not education. If we have radical people who, for their own purposes, would add outrageous racial whatever into the theology and the anthropology and I mean, come on. So what, everybody been going to school all these years to learn lies? If you don't believe in the fallen angels and Satan as prince, you'll never figure it out, because this is crazy. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's crazy. History is a lie. Science is a lie. Sociology is a lie. Okay. And anthropological theories and dividing of the victims against themselves, the use of spies and the encouragement of traitors, the involving of a rigid social code, helpful for their purpose, and disdaining, tabooing, and finally repressing all opposition, thought and deed, the establishment of elaborate police and military systems, the enacting of innumerable laws of oppression and suppression, the development, in short, of a social order within which the institution of Negro slavery became so deeply embedded that it was true that to touch one was to move the other. This indissoluble linking of one with the other epitomizes the entire method of control and was at once its strength and its weakness. So it says Negro slavery became so deeply embedded that it was true that to touch one was to move the other. So whatever it was as if whatever you did to one, you was doing it to all of them. This dissolvable linking of one with the other epitomizes the entire method of control. Okay, chapter 4, some precipitants of rebellion. Despite the existence of this intricate machine of exploitation, the direct victims of it, the Negro slaves, persistently resisted its creator, and occasionally received assistance from the less direct victims, the poor whites. Thought I was gonna say the blacks, huh? It were poor white people trying to help. The free blacks, I mean, they had their abolitionist movement, but I can see that that only helped them. We just gonna be truthful, okay? Because I was then, this is now. Can't move forward without the truth. You're stuck in the confused discombobulation of whatever is going on. Can't figure out what's going on. But I thought they were our friends. They're the Democrats. They're the Republicans. They're supposed to. We all been duped. Frederick Law Olmsted correctly remarked that any great event having the slightest bearing upon the question of emancipation is known to produce an unwholesome excitement. Okay, so let me read that again. Frederick Law Olmsted correctly remarked that any great event having the slightest bearing upon the question of emancipation is known to produce an unwholesome excitement among the slave population. It is moreover a fact that on numerous occasions, usual or striking events having no apparent connection with slavery were interrupted by the Negroes as though the connection was present. This played a part in participating some plots and uprising. So it is moreover on numerous occasions, unusual or striking events having no apparent connection. So they would use those unusual, striking events with slavery to interpret by Negroes as though the connection were present. So yeah, that's when they were playing their plots and uprisings, when other things were going on. Thus, the arrival of Governor Alexander Spotswood in Virginia in 1730 set the slaves whispering that he had brought from the king in order to set all slaves free that were Christians. Now, I mean, they had to start some type of stories going around to make themselves feel good. I mean, they didn't have All My Children and whatnot for the rumor. I mean, for the soap operas and the gossip. So make up their own gossip. Got to get some people excited going around the plantation thinking they're gonna be free. I mean, for a short time, they had this great excitement going on in their heart. It's good. It's good for them. I mean, the letdown probably was worse, but then they got used to the letdown. Just like we still used to the letdown. Okay. The slaves whispering that he had brought from the king in order to set all slaves free that were Christians, and to free those who had become Christians, but that their masters had suppressed this, while at first no discovery could be made of any form designed of their rising, but merely unlawful meetings and loose discourses, and these were soon stopped by keeping the militia to their duty, by imprisonment and severe whipping of the most suspected. Within 6 weeks, an actual conspiracy was uncovered. This centered in Norfolk and Princess Anne counties and had reached the point where on Sunday, whilst the people were at church, some 200 slaves gathered and proceeded to cuss from among themselves officers to command their intended insurrection. to coups, is CHUSE, coups from among themselves, officers to command their intended insurrection. So they even set up, picked officers and everything. This time, imprisonment and lashing were thought to be sufficient stimulants to docility, and 4 of the leaders were executed. Thereafter, it was provided that white men who went to worship the Prince of Peace were to take their guns with them. Like, y'all, what happened to prayer? What happened to turn the other cheek? Mm. Similarly, some hundreds of slaves of East Jersey near Somerville planned a rebellion and flight to nearby. Hold on. Some hundreds of slaves of East Jersey near Somerville planned a rebellion and flight to nearby Indians in 1734. So they're going to plan a rebellion and then flee to the Indians. Why would the Indians let them in there? In 1734. And one of the considerations moving them was a belief that the king had issued orders freeing them, but that these had kept them secret by their these had been kept secret by their owners. Now, they were telling the truth. It just didn't apply to them. It only applied to everybody that wasn't a Negro. Right? They were supposed to be converted into Christianity. And my video where I talked about Elizabeth Kay, that was what she said when she was in court. She said, "My father had me baptized when I was a baby. I am a Christian. You're not supposed to be able to enslave Christians unless they're Negroes." Okay? So that was the law. One Negro belonging to Mr. Hall, who appeared to have had a drink too many, could not resist under such exhilarating. Did they give them alcohol or did they make their own? Because they were so dumb. But the other reading said that they were selling their own wares, selling chickens and pigs, doing, making their own money. Sounds like a very intuitive, smart people, even after slavery of hundreds of years. Okay, it said, who appeared to have had a drink too many could not resist such an exhilarating circumstances. The pleasure for telling a white man of the above fact, that his further belief that Englishmen were generally a pack of villains, and that he, the slave, was a good man as himself, and that in a little time he should be convinced of it. Complete details of the plot were soon uncovered. Many slaves were arrested, and some of whom were found quantities of poison. Some were whipped, others had their ears cut off, and 2 were condemned to hang, though since one he had condemned to hang, though since one he of the loquacious mood escaped the gallows, claimed but one Negro. The gallows claimed but one Negro, so they only got to hang one. Note has already been taken of Governor Dean Whittle. Where do these people get these names from? Dean Whitty. His name is Dean Whitty. Remark in July 1755 that the slaves of Virginia, learning of the French victories over the British, were becoming very audacious. So they heard of, somebody came to the plantation and they're standing outside with the horses or whatever, a slave from somewhere else. And he heard from another plantation slave who was at his plantation, told him that there was a war going on between the French and the British. And you know what? This just might be that time because their resources are taken up fighting each other. This is a time to get together and try to get free. So they use those opportunities, which is good. Okay, very audacious. That's what people do today. That's a war strategy. Since they believed that the former would give them their freedom. Okay, the French. No one has already been. Let's see. Oh, no, they believe the British victories over the British. They believed that the former would give them their freedom. The bitter and prolonged congressional debates concerning the admission of Missouri into the Union, in the course of which men like King and Talmadge expressed opposition to slavery, somehow reached the ears of certain of the slaves involved in the Great Versey Conspiracy in 1822. Okay, so this was in South Carolina, but it reached their ears in exaggerated form, or as is perhaps more likely, they put into what they heard that which they wished to believe. So, they exaggerated the story a little bit, make it sound a little more believable and a little more like they would like it to go. In this way, they became convinced that Congress had not merely heard speeches denunciatory of slavery, but had actually passed an act of emancipation by which their masters refused to abide. So this is 1822. I'm saying the same thing in 2022. It's 2025 though. 2025, Congress write laws for the protection of the Negroes and nobody follows them. Okay. So right here, this Negro is saying the same thing. He said that they put into what they, Congress had not merely heard speeches denunciatory of slavery, but had actually passed an act of emancipation by which their masters refused to abide. Mention of this is made in an official report of the trials of the rebel Negroes, and it is also remarked upon by Joel Poinsett, who was in Charleston at the time, and declared the, the discussion of the Missouri question at Washington, among other evils, produced this plot. It was considered by this unfortunate and half instructed people as one of emancipation. Mm. In the winter of 1825, a slave was uncovered and crushed in Edgecombe, and it was believed some of the adjacent counties in North Carolina. Mm-mm. In the winter of 1825, a slave plot was uncovered and crushed in Edgecombe, and it is believed some of the adjacent counties in North Carolina. Okay. Slave preachers were blamed, and it is still like they can tell people what to do. No one can tell anyone else what to do. Even with the law, people still do what they want to do. It says slave preachers were blamed, and it was stated they had told the Negroes that the national government had set them free in October and that they were being unjustly held in servitude. There was more basis for the belief in the imminence of freedom that moved slaves in Texas and disturbed their masters in 1828. For the Constitution of the state of Coahuila, Texas, okay, of March 1827 declared that no one was hereafter to be born a slave and outlawed the instructions of any more slaves. Declared that no one was thereafter to be born a slave and outlawed after 6 months the introduction of any more slaves. A law, moreover, of May 1828 recognized the legality of contracts made between masters and workers prior to arrival in Texas, so that by the use of lifetime contracts, slavery for all practical purposes was legalized. Yet, the slaves felt that the government had indeed freed them, and they became very, very difficult and restless under the yoke. So this was right before the Civil War. The Civil War started in 1860. So 1828, that's about 30 years, maybe 32 years. You know, it was time. It was time. The owners had their own um, methods of driving concerns over legal questions from the minds of their chattel. So that, according to a contemporary investigator, they, in the effort to retain them, are making the yoke even heavier. Have you ever read the story of the children of Israel in Egypt? Yeah, so every time God said that you need to let these people go, it's time. No, he made it worse for them. He did worse things to them every time. And then let them go until he was destroyed. His whole land destroyed. All his army. Left all the women. All the men went in the sea, or wherever the water was, where they were going after the children of Israel. And Yeah, just keep it up, keep it up, keep it up, and then using. Well, Pharaoh wasn't using God; he thought he was God, but apparently these people think they're God too. They ain't got to obey no laws or anything, not even God's. Okay. They made their yoke even heavier. They extracted their teeth. Now, that's not making the yoke heavier. That's preparing them for being unhealthy. You need your teeth to properly chew your food in order to properly digest your food. Set on the dogs to tear them into pieces. The most lenient being he who but flogged his slaves until they were flayed, till their skin was open, and that was a mild punishment. And then somebody said in one of my comments, "We're all here to serve." Baby, I don't think that was what I was talking about in the video. I wasn't talking about regular service, like, helping others when they're in need, giving up yourself to someone that's in need. That's the service that the Lord is talking about, not what I was talking about. Not this. According to a magistrate, hold on. So it said widespread unrest was characteristic of the slaves in the South in 1829. One of the factors moving the Negroes of Virginia was the held belief that recent elections of delegates to the Constitutional Convention to be held in 1829 and 1830 was for the purpose of deciding the question of their emancipation. Some had decided to rebel unless this decision were in their favor. According to a magistrate of police in Wilmington, North Carolina, unrest and plotting among Negroes of that neighborhood in the summer of 1830 were attributable not merely to the circulation among them of David Walker's sedition pamphlet. In addition, the magistrate reported that a very general and extensive impression had been made on the minds of the Negroes in this in this vicinity, that measures have been taken toward their emancipation on a certain and not distant day, so they can feel it in their bones. Because let me see, when was the emancipation? The Emancipation Proclamation written. I should know it by heart now. 1863. So it was the executive order was issued by President Abraham Lincoln in 1863. So prior to that, it was talked about, because before they write something, they talk about it in Congress for a long time. Okay, so again, in the summer of 1830 were attributable not merely to the circulation uh, among them of David Walker's sedition pamphlet. In addition, the magistrates reported that a very general and extensive impression has been made on the minds of the slaves, of the Negroes, in this vicinity, that measures have been taken toward their emancipation on a certain, not distant day. So they said, it's coming. It's coming. I can feel it. Again, one of the considerations stirring slaves of Elizabeth City in the same state in 1835 was the belief, shared by free Negroes, that a liberator was on his way there from the north to lead them in the struggle for freedom. A liberator. Is that what they call him? Abraham Lincoln? Who probably wasn't quite born yet. I don't know. The tremendous fanfare of the Tippecanoe, it's the Tippecanoe and Tyler II campaign of 1840. That's a real thing. Tippecanoe and Tyler II campaign of 1840, with each side denouncing the other as abolitionists and vying in their allegiance devoted to liberty. So it says, campaign of 1840, with each side denouncing the other as abolitionists and vying in their alleged devotion to liberty, developed dangerous illusions amongst the slaves of Perry County, Alabama. Many believed that they were to be freed, one maintaining that Van Buren was in the region of Montgomery with an army of liberation totaling 200,000 men, while another felt that deliverance would come through the hand of a British force. Negroes told each other at their hush meetings, that the coming of freedom ain't no dream, ain't no joke. The time is most here. There won't be no more whipping, no more overseers, no more patrolling, no more hunting wild dogs. everybody gonna be free, and the white master's going to pay them for their work. Pay them for their work. Oh, my brother, be breast time, the best time of knocking at the door. The blessed times of knocking at the door. Most frequent patrolling arrests and lashings were needed to convince the slaves that they were wrong when they shouted, "The year of Jubilee! The year of Jubilee has come. We all gonna be free." A letter written from Clarksville, Georgia, February 2nd, 1844. They're getting close to it. It was working up on it. February 2nd, 1844 contained an interesting remark that the Negroes in Georgia are already saying to each other that great men are trying to set them free and will succeed, and many other expressions of similar import. Now, they just spent their entire time here trying to figure out how to control these slaves. And somebody suggested, if you want to control these uprisings and killings, get rid of slavery, you'll get rid of the uprisings. Oh, no, we can't do. No. What's wrong with you? Okay. Certain it is that one of the inspirations moving slaves in Texas. Oh, so hold on. I didn't read the rest of this. Oh, yeah, I did. The Negroes in Georgia are already saying to each other that great men are trying to set them free and will succeed, and many other expressions of similar import. Certain it is that one of the inspirations moving slaves in Texas and Tennessee to plot insurrection in 1856 was their belief that Colonel Fremont, the Republican presidential candidate, would aid them. A Memphis newspaper reported, in alluding to widespread evidence of unrest in that city, that a lady a few days ago went into her kitchen and gave some directions to the Negro cook, who who impudently replied with a sneer, "When Fremont's elected, you'll have to sling them pots yourself." Wow, that was pretty haughty, wasn't it? You have to sling them pots yourself. This hope gave encouragement to slaves convicted of conspiracy in Clarksville, Tennessee, even while they were receiving their punishment. Thus, a contemporary witness remarked, "Certain slaves are so greatly imbued with this fable that I have seen them smile when they're being whipped, and have heard them say that Fremont and his men can hear the blows they receive." This man ain't God. A vigilante committed in Harrison County, Texas, at the same time period, reported that there had been a good deal of loose talk among the Negroes about the late election, the prospect of Freeman's election, and the belief of some that they would be free if Fremont was elected. The next campaign led as many, excuse me, the next campaign led as many be expected to the development of similar ideas. Concrete examples of this occur less frequently than 4 years before. Though at least one slave in Georgia, following the success of Abraham Lincoln's success of Abraham Lincoln, announced Lincoln was elected now, and he was free. Severe whipping was necessary to convince him that his conclusion was rather premature. And he was free. So he told this to his master or something. Okay. The presence of Spaniards in Florida, who were hostile to English and befriended their fugitive slaves, was important in leading Negroes to gamble their lives in uprising in an attempt to reach that haven. This condition is well indicated in an unsigned letter dated Carolina, June 24th, 1720, describing a recent, very wicked and barbarous plot of the design of the Negroes rising, excuse me, rising with the design to destroy all the white people. Excuse me. But I'll say most of the rebels were captured, and some burnt and hanged, and some banished, but 14 at first eluded arrest. These thought to get to St. Augustine and hoped the Creek Indians would aid. but the latter would not join them or be their pilots. Another fact mentioned in this letter may also have had some importance in precipitating the information of this scheme. I am to inform you that at the same time the Negroes was playing the rogue, we had a small war with the Vocamus, a nation on the Wania River, not above 100 men. So he says, I am to inform you at the same time that that the Negroes were playing rogue, they had another war with the Vocamus, a nation on the Wania River. I never heard of the Wania River, but it's a whole bunch of places I ain't never heard of. Not above 100 men. For many years after this, Florida remained a magnet for America's slaves. For America's slaves, excuse me, as will be observed in the course of the narrative. It may here be noted that that the slaves who took part in the uprising at Stono, South Carolina, in September 1739, headed for the Edisto River, whose mouth is directly north of St. Augustine, their ultimate goal. Contemporaries indeed felt that this insurrection and others that immediately preceded and followed it were directly stimulated by agents of Spain, which by 1739 was officially at war with England, but no conclusive evidence of this has been seen. Okay, so um, let's talk about that. Them going to Florida. What was in Florida? So there was the Seminole Indians that the colonists named the runaways that were in Florida. So as you can see, it goes back and forth between Negroes and Indians, Negroes and Indians, Negroes and Indians. Okay, so the Seminoles, the name Seminole means runaway. So that wasn't one tribe. So when you say the Seminole Indians, you're like, well, they're not all one kind of people. There were many, many different tribes that ran to Florida and became the Seminole Indians, the runaways. In 1729 and 1730, the regular armed forces of the French in Louisiana found it difficult to suppress hostile Indians. Governor Pierre therefore decided to arm adult male slaves and use them against the Chinokas, the Chinachis. In the latter year, however, certain of the Negroes being armed became aware of the dependence of the white man upon their assistance, and realizing that they and the Indians had a common foe, conspired to unite their forces against him. The French learned of the plot in time, and the usual story of lashing of all involved and the execution of leaders were repeated. Mention has already been made of the signs of unrest noticed among slaves in Virginia and Maryland in the years 1755 and 1756. In the midst of, sorry, in the midst of, and as contemporaries felt, largely because of the derangement and excitement consequent upon the waging of the French and Indian War. So whenever there was a talk of wars among the colonists, wars with the Indians and the colonists, or any type of troubles going on in America, was an opportunity for an uprising of slaves, of Negroes. Much of the same situation prevailed during the years of the American Revolution. Here it is likely that the spirit and philosophy of that movement were important in arousing organized displays of discontent among the Negroes, as well as the excitement and turmoil characteristic of warfare, especially the Revolutionary Warfare. Negroes in Boston conspiring for liberty in September of 1774, tried to get the English to help them. They contacted an Irishman and got him to write Governor Gage, offering to fight with him, provided he would arm them and engage to liberate them if he conquered. So they offered their assistance, and if you win, can we be free? It has been said that the governor thought enough of the proposal to call it to the attention of Colonel Percy of the 5th Regiment, and to detail a Lieutenant Small to look carefully into the matter. The fact that this affair was kept pretty private and that there was little said or written about it cuts off further information. But clearly, the strange situation in the colonies was important. But clearly, the strange situation in the colony was important in stirring up the slaves. Negroes involved in the considerable plot in North Carolina in 1775 were well acquainted with and apparently moved by the existing political conditions. So they used those opportunities. They fighting amongst each other. This is a chance. Thus, they were aware of the fact that a large group of loyalists was present in the frontier regions. They had planned, after a successful rebellion, to head for a backcountry where they were to be received with by a number of persons there appointed and armed by the government for their protection. And as further reward, they were to be settled in a free government of their own. Some uneasiness prevailed. So if you're depending on, most people, like when I read history before colonization, people chose the winning side. Which side is winning? We going to that side. So if so like I said before, if it's either once the rebellion happened, it's either freedom or death, because there was no guarantee that this man was going to win and give them their freedom. So um, it was just a chance. It was taking a chance. Some uneasiness prevailed in Buck County, Pennsylvania in July 1776 because of the absence of the militia and evidence of a slave discontent, exemplified in the statement of one Sampson, slave of Jeremiah Dugan Jr., that he would burn the houses and kill the women and children of the associators when they marched out. Mm. In the spring of 1778, a slave named Tom, owned by Mr. Henry Hogan in Albany, New York, was jailed because he attempted to lead a fellow slave in an effort to obtain freedom and join the enemy. He was later released, but a warrant for his arrest was again issued. With what result is unknown. In January 1779, for he was endeavoring to stir up the minds of Negroes against their masters. So they let him go, and his whereabouts were unknown. However, they said he was stirring up the minds of other Negroes to rise up against their masters and cause insurrection. A slave woman belonging to Hendrick Van, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name, Schoonerhaven, betrayed the plot. So she told on somebody that was going to. And I can understand, like, if somebody run off a plantation, and if how some mothers, if one of the kids did something wrong, all the kids got spanking. That could have been the case. That could have been why people were afraid. Oh my God, they're gonna run and then they're gonna get beaten. I'm gonna get beaten. Everybody here gonna get beaten. I don't know. But a slave woman belonging to Hendricks betrayed a plot in July 1780 among a number of Negroes in Albany County, New York, to burn the Half Moon settlement and flee to the British. An effort apparently unsuccessful was made to arrest two loyalists, William Laux and Frederick Coonrat, who were believed to be implicated in the conspiracy. Again, a fairly considerable slave plot of June 1779 in Elizabethtown, New Jersey, was blamed by the local populace upon the intrigues of Tories, a group particularly prominent in that community. So blame on local populace upon the intrigues of the Tories. Okay. During the siege of Savannah, Georgia, interesting, by a combined American and French force in 1779, the hard-pressed British armed the Negroes and permitted them to serve in the ranks. So I think is it I think it was the first videos I made, the ones that were um, made with the AI. I talked about how the British and the French both offered Indians and Negroes freedom if they would fight with them. So then you had this big divide going on in America where half the people were running toward the British and the other half were running toward the French, trying to see who was going to win. Okay. Um, the revolutionists were defeated, but Governor James Wright, hold on a second, Negroes and permitted them to serve, something they willingly did as they expected freedom to be their reward. The revolutionists were defeated, but Governor James Wright found it a difficult matter to disarm and re-enslave the Negroes. Precise details of these men are lacking, but the trouble certainly at least approaches outright rebellion, and it was a difficult matter for the authorities to reduce them to their proper obedience and position. First, you let them fight next to you, you know, protect you, defend you, whatever, and then you want to put them back down to their lowly station after they, you know. It is highly possible that the outbreak of slave revolts in Louisiana in 1795, then owned by Spain, was partly attributed to the war then raging between France and Spain, a conflict that greatly complicated the whole problem of social control of the Negroes and whites, since many of the latter in Louisiana were French. The acquisition of Louisiana Territory by the United States in 1803 aroused fears that the non-American inhabitants of the area would express their discontent over the change in sovereignty. The non-American inhabitants of the area, who would that be? Let's see. Over sovereignty by inciting slave troubles. Mm. This was, for example, expressed December 9th, 1803, in a letter dated Huntstown in Mississippi Territory. Although there is no danger to be apprehended from either government, France or Spain, it is supposed that the Spaniards, such as ours, opposed to the American taking possession of the country, will be troublesome. As it is expected, they will get their Negroes to join them in doing private injuries, but such attempts can soon be stopped. Because the French were here for quite some time. Yeah, quite some time before the British. I think a couple hundred years or close to it. In the summer of 1804, a former officer in the Spanish service, John B.T. Paliot, at the moment a planter of, I can't pronounce this word either, Natchez, it's in New Orleans, Natchez, Orleans territory, swore before Captain Edward Turner of the United States Army that when recently in Spanish town of the Nacogdoches, he had seen a crown decree granting freedom and land to all American fugitive slaves. Interesting. The officer and Governor Claiborne of Orleans were asked to patrol the border more effectively, and this was done. While pressure was brought upon the Spanish officials to repudiate the decree, in October 1804, 9 slaves in the Natchitoches broke into a planter's house, took lead, powder, and horses, and reached Spanish territory. Another slave was wounded by the patrol and, under questioning, implicated about 30 more Negroes in similar plans and declared that 2 whites, one a Spaniard named Martinez, were also involved. Slaves elsewhere in Orleans, particularly Point Coupee, then became restless. Patrols were out on the alert, and federal troops who you having to use the army, federal troops, militias to keep the slaves in line. I don't see how that's no fun for nobody, the slaves or the people trying to keep them. Slaves elsewhere in Orleans, particularly Point Coupee, then became restless. Patrols were put on the alert, and federal troops, who earlier in the year had been moved into newly acquainted regions in large numbers, partly due to fears of slaves, were sent into the town of Natchitoches itself. I know I'm not pronouncing that right. Natchitoches. The Spaniards soon thereafter revoked the decree. A final piece of evidence of unrest appears in a letter written by Governor Claiborne to the mayor of New Orleans on November 1st, 1804. Here, reference is made to the coming trials of slaves, men and women, and the governor declared that if they were convicted, he would punish them in such a manner and at such places as may best serve to terrify those who may be inclined to commit similar enormities. So he was going to make an example out of them, try to scare everybody else back into submission. Quite a few conspiracies marked the years of the War of 1812, and probably many of them, if not all, were evoked, at least in part, because of the existence of the war itself. In only a few cases, however, is there direct evidence of such a connection. The possibility that the military activity and particularly the withdrawal of bodies of armed men from a given area would be likely to encourage slave unrest. Was widely understood and has been shown guarded against in at least Mississippi Territory, Maryland, Virginia, and South Carolina and Louisiana from 1812 to 1815. So they needed a lot of soldiers. They wanted people patrolling the outlying areas, patrolling the roads, patrolling the coastline. In addition, two specific instances of unrest were ascribed to the war by contemporaries. One involved the of the capital as British slaves of the capital as the British advanced toward it in the summer of 1813. John Graham noted this in a letter to James Monroe. We have some intimation of proposed insurrection. You know, I'm sure we could have used a different word. We have some intimation of proposed insurrections among the blacks in case the enemy come up on this score. However, I feel no alarm. Well, okay. He must have had the gun all the time. The diary entry of the son of the vice president is more full of the subject. After noting the reported proximity of the enemy, young Mr. Geary wrote, "As the militia are ordered off, I expect to patrol more frequently, and this is very necessary, for the blacks in some places refuse to work, and say they shall soon be free, and then the white people must look out. One Negro woman went so far as to steal her mistress's keys and refuse to return them, saying she would soon pay her for old and new. Hold on. Saying she would soon pay her for old and new. Okay. This was in the city, and the Negro was confined. Mm. Should we be attacked, there would be great danger of the black rising, and to prevent this, patrols were very necessary to keep them in awe. One other preventative at present is the want of a leader. In the summer of 1814, a free Negro betrayed a slave conspiracy in Fredericktown, Maryland. The affair was rumored to be very serious, and great fear prevailed. Because of this, the local newspaper thought it necessary to notice the affair and proceeded to minimize it, declaring that but 8 Negroes were in prison and that the seriousness of the matter had been greatly exaggerated. So this is the way they were always, so the communication wasn't happening from state to state. They were writing it to each other, to kings and to magistrates or whoever they wanted to write to, judges and pastors or whatever. But they were not putting it in the news and telling what actually happened. They would tell the exaggerated version, which was less than what it needed to be. They did not put enough information in there. Oh, about 8 slaves, was rising up down there in Fredericktown, but they squashed it. Everything's all right. There had been among the slaves, the paper admitted, some talk of arming themselves with knives. that when a larger number of militia was called out, they were to attack the town and had proceeded to nominate a captain and other officers for their company. The betrayal, however, and the arrest of the leading rebels effectively removed all danger, said the paper, and it concluded by urging the populace to remain calm. Everything is all right. You ain't got to worry about these old slaves. The fighting incident to the revolt of the Anglo American in Texas against Mexico. The fighting incident to the revolt of the Anglo Americans in Texas against Mexico and the excitement this produced. Again, another fight between other people. Negroes like, yeah, they fighting again. Okay, where's Bill? Tell him to get the stuff ready. We going tonight. It says the excitement this produced were important to precipitating a slave conspiracy there in 1835. The rebelling whites were told that the Mexicans aimed to put their slaves free and let them loose upon their families. Stop it. And the spreading of this idea while creating fear among the slaveholders undoubtedly created hope and determination among some of their slaves. There is, moreover, evidence of active agitational work on the part of an unnamed free Negro at this same time. Okay, so there is, moreover, evidence of active agitational work on the part of an unnamed free Negro at the same time. Early in October, it was reported that a force of 2,000 Mexicans were approaching the Brazos River, and 1 week later came the report. The Negroes on Brazos made an attempt to rise. Major Sutherland came on here for a few men to take back nearly 100. Sorry, let me read that again. Major Sutherland came on here, with whatever Goliad is, for a few men to take back nearly 100 had been taken up, many whipped nearly to death, some hung, etc. Okay. So they took back nearly 100. For a few men to take back nearly 100 had been taken up, many whipped nearly to death, and hung. Okay. R.H. Williams had nearly killed. They spelled that Kild. One of his blanks there to death. Hold on, let me read that again. Nearly killed one of his. There followed a most interesting postscript. The Negroes above alluded to had divided all the cotton farms, and they intended to ship the cotton to New Orleans and make the white men serve them in turn. Wow, they're funny. During the years of the Mexican War, a few slave plots were reported. Excuse me. But in only one case was any direct connection between that event and the conspiracy noted. This occurred on May 1846 in Pensacola, Florida. A letter from that city declared that the slaves had planned to rebel. As soon as sufficient number of white men went off to war, arrest and great excitement followed. So they had their little quiet rooms where they snuck off and spoke in code or whatever they did. It's another time. It's another opportunity. All right. And since many, okay. So it said, sufficient white men. Okay. Arrest and great excitement follow. Everybody's armed. And some of the ladies are so frightened that they keep pistols loaded. And since many Negroes were employed in the city's Navy Yard, its commander, Commodore Lattimore, placed it under martial law. During the Civil War, there was much disaffection and unrest among the slaves, frequently advancing to the form of conspiracy and rebellion. Unquestionably, the conflict itself, particularly as its anti-slavery nature became more manifest, was of prime importance in bringing this about. Again, however, this direct evidence of this relationship is available in only a few cases. Thus, in May 1861, a servile conspiracy in which whites were supposed to be implicated was uncovered in Arkansas. So a lot of times, you white folks didn't like their indentured servitude either. I mean, I know it was only for a little while, but it must have been pretty bad for them to want to run away and not finish it out and get their little, you know, whatever they get. So never did we see of any free black Negroes helping enslaved Negroes. After killing their enslaver to march up the river to meet, okay, the plot was to have matured on July 4th, and the Negroes had planned, after killing their enslaver, to march up the river to meet Mr. Lincoln, Linkum, Lincoln. In December of that year, numerous houses and barns were burned by Negroes in Henry County, Kentucky. While in Newcastle of the same state, in the same month, about 60 slaves paraded the city, singing political songs and shouting for Lincoln. With no one daring to suppress this unique demonstration. Early in 1862, 17 Negroes, free and slave, were reported to have been executed in Culpeper County, Virginia. Among them were found copies of the recently issued preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. They lived to see the day. The plot was believed to be widespread, and there existed the greatest consternation imaginable among the whites in that section. A Confederate newspaper, in reporting the slave plot in Richmond, indicated its belief that it was connected with the intrigues by the enemy, under the heading "Serious Charge Against a Negro." A typical laconic account followed. A Negro named Bob Richardson. Where did he get these? Bob Richardson, well known in Richmond as a waiter in a saloon, has been committed to Castle Thunder upon the charge of being at the head of a servile plot, which received its inspiration from the enemy. It seemed like these people back then could find out more information faster than our police and FBI and everything today. They ain't even had that technology. How come they always found who the head was, who the leader was, who the plot person was, somehow. Okay. From the enemy, which was broken in through. Okay, which was broken up in upon a few days ago by the detectives. He will receive his Castle Thunder upon the charge of being at the head of the servile plot, which received its inspiration from the enemy, and which was broken in upon a few days ago by the detectives. He will receive his desert right speedily. At about this time, slaves burnt a considerable portion of Yazoo City, Mississippi, destroying the courthouse and 14 homes. In noting this incident, the Mississippian remarked that it was with great difficulty that the Negroes were kept from burning it when the enemy, it was with great difficulty that the Negroes were kept from burning it when the enemy were there before. Okay. The coming into prominence of a revolutionary philosophy or the occurrence of a mass upheaval were other factors tending to produce slave unrest. The probability that, the radicalism current during the American Revolution played a part in provoking slave plots. During that period has already been noted. So the probability that um, radicalism current during the American Revolution played a part in provoking slave plots during that period has already been noted. Okay. Certainly, however, the event of the revolutionary nature that had more effect than any other in producing slave unrest within the present borders of the United States was the tremendous rebellion and prolonged struggles of the Negroes of Santo Domingo, beginning in the summer of 1791. Concerning this influence, there is considerable evidence. So, when they heard about what was going on in Santo Domingo, and it started in the summer of 1791, I don't know how long it lasted. So, anyway, I'll read some more of it next time. Thank you for joining me. And like, share, and subscribe. Share the video and like it. Thank you. Have a good day.